BTK, the serial killer who got caught because he wanted credit. He killed for 17 years, then went quiet for over a decade, and everyone assumed he was dead or in prison for something else. Then he came back, not to kill again, but because he was upset nobody was writing about him anymore. He wanted credit for his own murders, and that specific need for recognition is exactly what finally got him caught. Dennis Rader began killing in Wichita, Kansas in 1974, adopting the self-created name BTK, standing for Bind, Torture, Kill, a description he used himself in early letters sent directly to police and local media, specifically detailing his methods and taunting investigators, communications that made clear from the very beginning of his killings that Rader, unlike many serial offenders who actively avoided any public attention, specifically wanted recognition and notoriety for his crimes, a genuinely distinctive psychological pattern that would ultimately prove central to both his prolonged evasion of capture and his eventual downfall decades later. Rader murdered at least 10 people between 1974 and 1991, targeting individuals and families seemingly at random within the Wichita area, and throughout this period, maintained an entirely ordinary, unremarkable public life that gave absolutely no indication of his hidden activities, working as a compliance officer for the city of Park City, Kansas, a role that, in a genuinely unsettling detail investigators would later discover, occasionally granted him access to enforce municipal code violations against ordinary citizens and serving as an active, engaged member of his local Lutheran church, where he held a leadership position within his congregation and was generally regarded by neighbors and fellow church members as a genuinely conventional, unremarkable family man. What made Rader's case genuinely, distinctively unusual among documented serial killers was his sustained, active communication with police and media throughout his killing period, sending letters and later packages containing items taken from his victims, specifically designed to prove his authenticity and taunt investigators with details only the actual killer could have known. Communications that continued intermittently throughout the 1970s, before falling entirely silent for an extended period beginning in the early 1990s, leading investigators and the general public alike to reasonably assume the killer had either died, been imprisoned for an unrelated crime, or simply permanently stopped. Rader's silence lasted until 2004, when, apparently motivated by his own observation that a local newspaper's 30th anniversary coverage of his original killings hadn't adequately, in his own view, credited or acknowledged his specific identity and methods, he resumed direct communication with police and media, sending a letter that included a photocopy of a victim's driver's license along with other details specifically intended to prove his renewed, genuine engagement with the case, a decision that genuinely, directly initiated the specific investigative sequence that would ultimately lead to his identification and arrest less than a year later. This renewed communication proved genuinely, critically significant to the investigation's eventual success, since Rader, apparently believing modern digital technology couldn't actually be traced back to him specifically, asked investigators directly, through one of his communications, whether a floppy disk could be tracked if he used one to send further correspondence. And police, recognizing a genuine opportunity, deliberately, deceptively responded that floppy disks couldn't be traced, information that was, in reality, false, specifically designed to encourage Rader to use exactly this method of communication. When Rader subsequently sent a floppy disk to a local television station as part of his renewed correspondence, forensic computer analysts were able to recover deleted metadata embedded within the disk's file properties, which included a reference to Christ Lutheran Church, along with a specific first name, Dennis, information that, combined with subsequent investigation, confirming Rader's specific position and role within that exact church, allowed investigators to formally identify him as the primary suspect, leading to DNA evidence obtained through a medical sample connected to his daughter's own separate medical records, ultimately confirming his identity as BTK through familial genetic matching, providing definitive forensic confirmation before his formal arrest in February of 2005. Rader's arrest and subsequent confession revealed the genuinely unsettling, sustained duality of his actual life, a man who had spent over 3 decades as an outwardly conventional community member, church leader, and family man, while secretly having committed a series of horrific murders decades earlier, maintaining meticulous personal records and detailed documentation of his crimes that he kept hidden throughout the entire period evidence investigators recovered following his arrest that provided extensive, disturbing insight into the specific psychological compulsions and detailed planning underlying his sustained pattern of violence. Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder in 2005, avoiding a formal trial, and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences, a sentence effectively guaranteeing he will die in prison, having provided investigators and, subsequently, criminologists and psychological researchers studying serial offender behavior with an unusually extensive, detailed personal account of his own crimes and underlying motivations, given during formal interviews and court proceedings following his guilty plea, information that has since contributed significantly to broader academic and law enforcement understanding of the specific psychological patterns underlying serial offenders who, unlike many documented cases, actively sought public recognition and notoriety throughout their period of active offending. What makes Rader's case endure as one of history's most significant examples of criminal psychology directly leading to eventual capture isn't simply the scale or duration of his crimes, genuinely disturbing as that decades-long pattern remains, but the specific, almost paradoxical detail that ultimately proved decisive to his capture. A killer who had successfully evaded identification for over 3 decades, specifically because he understood how to avoid leaving direct evidence, was ultimately undone not by any investigative breakthrough connected to his original crimes, but by his own psychological need for continued recognition, a compulsion strong enough to override the same careful caution that had protected his identity for over 30 years. If stories like this, where a killer's own need for recognition proved to be the one vulnerability decades of careful planning couldn't protect against, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.